Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. I get a lot of requests to profile the P-51 Mustang. To those who ask, I hear you. I really do. And here's a picture of one to look at for now. But there are just some planes that I'm holding back for later on, in the same way that one can look forward to, dessert. So for all the requesters, here's a way to get a little bit of Mustang without doing the fully fledged P-51 just yet. And it also follows in my tradition of bringing the weirdos to light. One day it'll be bundled into the comprehensive story of the Mustang, including the F-82 and even the Cavalier. However, that will be another day. But today, let's dive bomb into the version of the Mustang known as the A-36, which I'm pretty sure many people have never heard of. It is interesting that the all-American Mustang started out as a very British aircraft. It was designed and built for the British, with their requirements in mind. North American Aviation was initially asked by the British Air Council Subcommittee on Supply to build P-40 Warhawks. North American thought that they could do better, and about 100 days later, the result was the Allison-engined fighter that the British called the Mustang I. The British ordered 320 and then liked them so much that they ordered another 300. Unfortunately, the Lend-Lease contract with Britain ran out of funds, and so the future of the Mustang was now in doubt. Then the attack on Pearl Harbor occurred, and so that must have been a shot in the arm for the Mustang. No, not really. Already existing types, such as the Lockheed P-38, Bell P-39, and the newish Republic P-47 all got the fighter contracts first. It may seem strange to think that wars are fought on budgets, but they are, and there just wasn't any money left in the U.S. fighter treasury for the time being. Now, without any contracts, North American Aviation's whole Mustang production line was in jeopardy. The company president, Howard Dutch Kindleberger, wanted to keep building Mustangs, but the money for them had to come from somewhere. Enter General Oliver P. Eccles. He was Assistant Chief of Staff for Material Maintenance and Distribution, and so was in charge of building up American air power. Working for him was Fighter Project Officer Benjamin S. Kelsey. Now, if that name is familiar to you, it means that you might be a long-term listener or viewer of World of Warbirds. Yes, he was all over the P-38 episodes, partly due to his liaison work with the Allison Engine Company, and more specifically his pushing of their liquid-cooled 12-cylinder V1710 engine. With the P-38, Kelsey had also found a way to get it built, as the line in the Cake song says, by, in quotes, using a machete to cut through red tape, close quotes. He wanted a heavily armed fighter for the USAAC, but the regs stated that for pursuit aircraft, haven't you always wondered why they were called Ps? The armament had to be less than 500 pounds. Kelsey wanted more guns, so rather than try to fight or change the Army's regulations, Kelsey just made up a whole new class of high-altitude fighters, not bound by the archaic Army restrictions, called interceptors. They wrote up two specifications in 1937. One was for a single engine and one for a twin-engine interceptor. One became the Airacobra and the other the P-38 Lightning. So Kelsey decided to do a similar Jedi mind trick on the Mustang. There was no money for fighters, but there was money for attack bombers. These are not the fighters you're looking for. These are attack bombers. We'll take 500 of them. This contract was signed on the 16th of April, 1942. Now, all North American Aviation had to do was turn their fighter into a dive bomber. The fuselage remained essentially the same, but the wings had to be redesigned. Firstly, they needed the shackles to carry the bombs. Next, they needed dive brakes, which were made out of cast aluminum and looked like little fences that swung out hydraulically from the top and bottom of each wing. Lastly, the whole wing had to be strengthened to handle the forces of a dive bomber attack. Wind tunnel testing was done with a 1/8 scale model, and planning work was completed by June 1942. They called it the A-36 Apache, and along with the bombs, it would also have 2 nose-mounted and 4 wing-mounted 50 caliber machine guns for plenty of ground-pounding firepower. By the fall of that year, the first A-36 was ready, and on September 21st, 1942, the first one took to the sky and began dive bombing trials. Being such a clean aircraft, the A-36 was very fast in a dive at 450 to 500 miles per hour. That's 724 to 804 kilometers per hour. And the dive brakes could really only slow it down to about 350 miles per hour. How does that compare to other dive bombers? The famous Ju-87 Stuka dove at 310 to 370 miles per hour. And the US Navy's ship-killing SBD dove at about 275 miles per hour. The A-36 was so speedy that one test pilot misinterpreted his speed and altitude and crashed in the recovery. After that, A-36s were limited to a dive angle of 70 degrees. So, was the A-36 simply a bit of bureaucratic judo to circumvent red tape and budgetary constraints? Or was it actually a good ground attack aircraft? Let's look at how it did operationally. In April 1943, the type began arriving at the 27th Fighter Bomber Group at Ras El Ma airfield in French Morocco. The 4 squadrons of the group already operated the Douglas A-20 Havoc attack bombers, and they now folded in the Apaches to their unit. Supposedly the name Apache wasn't used much in the field, and there was actually a move to rename it the Invader. Although I don't know what's wrong with the name Apache. The Boeing AH-64 attack helicopter wears it very well. In many reports written at the time, though, the aircraft is simply referred to as the Mustang. There are stories that the Germans nicknamed the aircraft the Screaming Helldiver, but, from Whispering Death to Fork-tailed Devil, I've become very skeptical of supposed nicknames for Allied aircraft. So I don't really know if this was the case. On the 6th of June 1943, A-36s flew combat missions supporting Operation Corkscrew, which was the Allied invasion of the island of Pantelleria. This island had an Italian garrison with 12,000 troops dug into sturdy pillboxes and 21 gun batteries. These needed to be neutralized and taken out before the big action of the invasion of Sicily could begin. The A-36s did their bit by arriving at the target at around 12,000 feet, deploying their dive brakes, and then screaming in at about 390 miles per hour, that's 630 kilometers per hour. Reportedly, the dive brakes were very effective at keeping the A-36 stable in the dive. The bombs were released at between 2,000 to 4,000 feet, that's 610 to 1,220 meters, and then there was a pull-up to recover from the dive. The air and naval bombardment of the island was so effective that the garrison surrendered immediately to the landing force, and the A-36 units said thank you very much and used the island as their base for the Allied invasion of Sicily. About 300 A-36s were employed for this work, being called in whenever the Allies needed mopping up of enemy gun positions and other strong points knocked out. Unlike many other dive bombers, the A-36 was also good at air-to-air fighting, and the type racked up 84 enemy kills, and Lieutenant Michael T. Russo from the 27th Fighter Bomber Group became an ace. The Royal Air Force also used some A-36s in Foggia, Italy to replace their Martin Baltimores. They were painted up with RAF rondelles and had their Chin 50 cals removed. A-36s also served in the China-Burma-India theater, being operated by the 311th Fighter Bomber Group from Dinjan, India in late summer 1943. They were less successful there, being asked to do reconnaissance, dive bombing, attack, and fighter missions over long ranges at high altitudes where the Allison engine was not the best, and against light and nimble Japanese fighters. The A-36's missions in the CBI continued into 1944 until being gradually withdrawn. Although the A-36s did very well, being far better than just acting like some sort of placeholder to keep the Mustang assembly line open, it was not the ideal ground attack aircraft. The ventrally located radiator and liquid cooling system was very vulnerable to ground fire, and one hit there meant that your flight time was about to be significantly shortened. By June 1944, A-36s in Europe were being replaced by Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, whose air-cooled engines could eat ground fire and just keep on flying. There are few surviving A-36s as it was a limited run type, but North American A-36A Apache construction number 97-15883 flew training missions for the US AAF during the war years, and after a crash and being bought and sold and stored a few times for years, it thankfully ended up being restored for static display by the Minnesota Air National Guard in 1973, and is now at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. It is painted up to represent Margie H., which was flown by Captain Lawrence Dye of the 16th Fighter Bomber Squadron, which operated through Tunisia, Sicily, and Italy. Some of these pictures are taken by our very own Tanner during her visit to the USAAF Museum this summer. Now, I previously said that the A-36 wasn't simply a placeholder to keep workers building Mustangs, but it did serve that purpose too. Later on, when the fighter budget logjam was cleared up, the USAAF ordered 310 A-36s, but without the dive brakes and nose-mounted guns, but keeping the bomb racks that were now mainly used to carry drop tanks. These aircraft were still powered by the 1,200 horsepower Allison V17-1081 engine with the same radiator and air intake arrangements as the Apache, although these fighters would have a different designation, the P-51A. But, my friends, for the story of the P-51A and all the rest of the herds of Mustangs that followed, we will have to wait for another day and another episode. It may have been P.T. Barnum, or Walt Disney, or someone else who first said, "Always leave them wanting more," and that, hopefully, is what I am doing here. Please help to keep this channel going by liking, subscribing, sharing, sending me a super thanks, or becoming a member. Until next time.